Hey rePROs, if you like this show, you might like Public Health is Dead. Hosted by Daniela Barreto, a public health advocate with a background in epidemiology and health science. It's a new podcast that brings undaunted public health defenders together to plot a new path forward for better health for us all. If you have been watching, like I have, the Trump administration attacking public health institutions worldwide, you know that all is not well in the world of public health. It's failing right now. Preventable diseases are, well, preventable, and you deserve to know. This show is your anti-establishment field guide to surviving in the age of pandemics. Listen and subscribe to Public Health is Dead on Apple Podcasts, your favorite podcast app, or publichealthisdead.com. Welcome to rePROs Fight Back, a podcast on all things related to sexual and reproductive health rights and justice. Hi, rePROs. How's everybody doing? I'm your host, Jennie Wetter, and my pronouns are she, her. So y'all, I'm recording this just after getting a haircut and color, and I had a while since my last one, so my hair had really grown out, and so my hairstylist and I were talking. We decided we're looking at pictures for inspiration and decided to go super short, which I know I have a pixie already, but we went really short and decided that, you know what? If we're going to do super short and cut, we can go super bold in color. Y'all, we went real bright red. It's gorgeous. But it was such a change that it was really shocking. It took a minute to grow on me. And I think she got a little worried watching me in the chair, because I was it took a minute for me to adjust to such a big color change, but it looks really great. And I got outside in the sun and it was such a vibrant, bright red. It's just stunning. So thank you, Leah. It looks beautiful. I love it. And I'm so happy to have my super short pixie cut back, because it really had gotten long and out of control. And I need to not let that happen again, because it was bad. It was bad, y'all. I think I'm just going to stop there, because we're doing something a little different today. I'm the one being interviewed. So with that, let's just throw it over to Tarah.
Hello, podcast listeners. I bet this was not the voice you were expecting. Hello, my name is Tarah Demant, and my pronouns are she, her, and I am not Jennie Wetter, the host of rePROs Fight Back. I am, however, a grateful colleague of Jennie's. I work at Amnesty International USA, and I'm really excited to welcome our guest to the podcast today, who is Jennie Wetter. Jennie, can you introduce yourself and your pronouns and a little bit about why you're here today on that side of the microphone?
Yeah. Oh, first, Tarah, thank you so much for doing this. I am so grateful that you were able to jump in and play host today. It's always so much fun and also weird to be on the other side of the microphone. But anywho, I'm Jennie Wetter. My pronouns are she, her. I am coming here not as the host of rePROs Fight Back, but as the director of the rePROs Fight Back initiative at the Population Institute. And I am here to talk about our brand new 50-state report card that just got released last week when you all hear this.
So one, taste of your own medicine, being on the other side of the mic. So now you know how other guests are so excited to talk about these things and to have those questions asked. So really grateful to talk to you around these things, not just because of the broad work that we all do, but particularly as a human rights practitioner. The idea of reproductive rights in the United States is of a huge concern, obviously, to the human rights community and to hopefully all communities as we're seeing what's happening. So this report card launched last week, if you're listening, but on Wednesday, March 19th. Tell us a little bit about the scope of this. When we say this, report card launched, what is it that actually came out into the world?
Yeah, so we started doing this report card. This is our 13th annual report card. And we wanted to start doing it to fit into that gap of people were familiar of some of the egregious attacks that were happening at the state level. If something in particular was kicking off, for example, in Texas. Mm. But if you had conversations with them, they were less familiar of what the laws were around sexual and reproductive health in their own states. You'd be like, did you know your state doesn't mandate sex ed? And they had no idea. So we wanted to make sure to kind of fill that gap to give people a tool to see how their state compared to other states, which is why we started doing the 50-state report card. And I also think it helps fill some of that gap of so much of our work falls into silos, right? So this person talks about birth control. This person does abortion work. This person works on Medicaid. But all of these are integral to people's sexual and reproductive health and rights. And we need to make sure that we are talking about them as one thing, that they all work together and are interrelated, and not just this is really bad abortion stuff that is happening, but we also need to talk about, well, that state also doesn't mandate sex ed. They also have these affordability issues. We want to make sure that people are getting that whole big picture and not just the like separate single silo attacks.
What are the things that you're covering in the report card?
Yeah. So again, like I said, it's kind of a big thing. So I think the best way to think about it is in categories. We have 3 main categories of indicators we look at. We look at prevention, and that's things like sex education. Sex education varies widely from state to state, honestly, from school district to school district. You need to make sure that young people are getting a comprehensive, medically accurate sex education. I've talked about my experience before going to Catholic school and having sex ed from a nun. So like I know the like longer term harms of getting inaccurate sex education and not comprehensive sex education, and how that sets you up for failure later in life. The next thing we look at under prevention is access to emergency contraception in the emergency room, making sure that ERs are not only telling sexual assault victims it's an option, but also giving it to them if they want it. And then the last prevention thing we look at is making sure that minors are able to consent to birth control. And that's really important to make sure that young people are able to access care. The next category we have is affordability. Access doesn't matter if you can't afford the services, right? So it is a really important category. And 3 of the indicators we look at under that relate to Medicaid. Medicaid is a really big program covering so many things, but it's really important to remember it also plays a big role in sexual and reproductive health. It covers family planning and other sexual and reproductive health services. Right now, more than 40% of births in the country are covered by Medicaid and maternal health care. So we want to make sure that states have expanded their Medicaid program under the Affordable Care Act. We want to make sure that states have expanded their family planning coverage beyond what the base coverage is. A lot of states do that by expanding based on income. And the last one, and honestly, y'all, this is the one like true good news story in this report card, is Medicaid decided that states could expand their maternal health coverage for 1 year postpartum. And at a time when we have a maternal mortality crisis, particularly for Black women, this is huge. Yeah. And I thought this was going to play out like Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act, where lots of states were just going to refuse to do it. But as of right now, only Wisconsin and Arkansas have not made that 1 year expansion. Like, honestly, a truly good news story. Which, again, we all need that bright ray of hope somewhere, right?
We all need. So what's the last quarter? You have prevention, you have affordability. What's the last bucket?
Access. So we look at abortion restrictions like gestational bans, making sure that states don't have waiting periods, which make people come to the clinic twice. Again, making sure that young people are able to access care, so making sure that there aren't parental consent notice laws. We also want to make sure states don't have trap laws or extra regulations on medication abortion. So who can provide a medication abortion, or making sure that people come in person. We want to make sure that states aren't doing that. And then the last thing we look at is making sure that states aren't banning best practice gender-affirming care. We want to make sure that young people are able to access that life-saving and life-changing healthcare.
Let's dive in a little bit. You've talked a number of these categories and the way that young people particularly are implicated. So around prevention, 2 of your 3 categories, sex ed, and then access for minors. And then when you're talking around access, can young people access abortion-related care? Can they access other types of care? Can they access gender-affirming care? Where do you see young people showing up in this type of report card? Do you see differences in the way that a state treats young people or minors, so let's say, 17 or younger, as opposed to the way it treats people the age majority, adults, 18 or over.
Yeah, I think, parental consent laws are like really widespread in so many states. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. Sorry, y'all, but it is a shocking number of states have parental consent laws for abortion. And so I think that is like one place. I think this comes down to people still feel like icky or uncomfortable talking about young people and sex. And that's not fair to young people, right? They need to be able to have the tools they need to make healthy decisions about their lives. And they're set up to fail often from the beginning by not giving them comprehensive sex ed. And this is one of those things that I will say continues to surprise me every year of the mixture of states that don't mandate sex ed, right? It's not just the ones you think. And even in some of the states that are failing, they do require sex ed or some forms of sex ed. But then you have a state like Massachusetts or Colorado that doesn't mandate any at all. So, you can't just assume what states are doing for young people. And I think that is, again, the place to start is looking at sex ed and then looking if minors are allowed to consent to accessing services. And again, that's one of those that you do see some like states where you wouldn't expect allowing it and some states that you wouldn't expect not allowing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you get to where there's just an ickiness people feel around the question of youth and sexuality. And then also like a hard line in the sand for who gets rights when, right? At 18.
And like the parents should be able to have that say. And like, I think we see that around, pushback we get around not having parental consent laws and this is a place where you can see the anti-rights movement really trying to peel people off, right? Mm-hmm. They use the young people as the gateway to start chipping away at access. So that's really where you started to see abortion bans coming in with putting in parental consent laws. And then once you started there, well, there were other ways you could chip away at abortion laws. And now you're seeing that play out again with gender-affirming care, where you see people targeting minors' access to gender-affirming care because, again, there's that like discomfort and people don't have the familiarity with trans people in general, but particularly young trans people. And so it's easier doesn't feel like the right word, but it's like that way to start chipping in and also knowing it doesn't stop there.
Right. I mean, there's two things you're sort of talking around. We can talk more topics, but I'm really interested in this because I think one is you're exactly right. Like minors are a much quote unquote easier target to take away rights, right? They're a much easier target to reduce these rights because people across political spectrums will have a different reaction than they will to rights being taken away for adults, right? Legal adults, and particularly around sex and sexuality, right? So this becomes a way in which anti-rights actors can begin to take away rights like that get taken away from young people, but as a way to test balloon how they're going to take away rights overall. So how are they chipping away at our sexual and reproductive rights in general? Well, let's start with parental consent laws because you can get across the aisle agreement on these things. I think it's a real challenge in that the way that rights language and law in general, right, is based on the age majority at 18 or wherever your state the government, being the federal government or state government, sets the age of adulthood, right? And therefore, before that exists this sort of legal space of a variety of types of understandings of rights. And that's, true in the human rights space as well, particularly under sexual and reproductive health and rights, that like there are differences in maturity between adults and minors, but that young people still have rights. And there is a moving maturation, right? This understanding that like it may be different for a 5-year-old than it is a 12-year-old, but it's not that then the answer is completely opposite of what an 18-year-old has for rights. And I think that becomes a trickier spot, but also a place that we see the beginnings of rights being taken away. And like the rights that are taken away when you are young will dramatically impact the rest of your life, right? And you talked about sex ed. So I actually want to zoom in on sex ed. You and I have talked on this podcast before on our different experiences or similar experiences in very different states around sex education. So I noticed that my home state, the Golden State of California, received an an A category. And there's such good work going on protecting rights at the state level and a lot of law and policy. And I grew up in California and went to school, public school in California, and received abstinence-only education at my public high school in California. So, and that was clearly not this year of our Lord 2025.
I mean, I hope not.
Like, some 1 or 2 years ago being 30 years ago. But the laws around how education gets rolled out is very different. So what does it mean to give a state like California an A grade when the reality is, and I know this for a fact at the high school that I went to, they still don't teach sex ed. They teach abstinence only. And there's obviously a huge religious bent to that. But so what does it mean to give a really good grade where there's going to be actual real failures?
Yeah, I think this is so important, that the utility of having a statewide report card, of seeing how your state fares when it comes to other states, really hides things, right? Like, access really depends on where you live. And that can be like the state you live, it can be the county you live within that state. You may have a state like California where there are pockets where you are further away from clinics, you don't have that same type of access, or even just thinking through, Tarah and I both being from like small towns, of, okay, so minors can consent to birth control. There wasn't a Planned Parenthood that I could get to real easy. So if I had gotten a prescription, the pharmacist knows my parents.
Right.
Like, there's not like that. I mean, I'm sure a lot of pharmacists will hold that confidentiality, but like in a small town, things tend to maybe work a little different. And like, so there are things that definitely hide within that. So California is doing great compared to other states, but that is not to say there is not work to be done. I mean, again, this is like the losing sense of time. I think it was last year, had on someone from Access Abortion Fund in California, Jessica Pickney-Gill, on to talk about where California needed to change and all of the ways that there are things that need to be done to increase access in California. So that is the downside of doing a state-by-state grade, is it does hide some of those things, or kind of even the reverse of like having like bad states, but there are pockets within that state where they are doing good things. You hear about cities in Texas trying to do things to help increase access, or, you know, developing a fund that's going to help people travel out of state to get care. So there are things that inevitably will get hidden within a state grade, but I still think it is a really useful tool for people to see how their state is comparing to other states. And one thing we did this year that is different, we have an interactive tool on our website where you can see the report card, and that's reportcard.reprosfightback.com. And so you'll see the state maps. You can see how your state overall compares to other states. But then there are also toggles on the side. And so you can go sex ed. How does our state compare when it comes to sex ed? And then the map will change. And you can see how it relates on all of the indicators, which is also just fascinating to take some time and play around with to see where your state is succeeding. Because no state like got zeros, right? There are states who are doing real bad, but like nobody got zero. So there are places where states are doing things well. And I think that is also useful to acknowledge. We can't just have everybody failing, although they try.
I mean, we can, and we'd prefer not. I do think this gets into one of the questions I have, right? Is like, what is the point of scorecards and how do we use that? And I think you spoke very well to, especially with this new interactive site, which is very cool, that you can go in and like actually break down what this grade actually means. Right? As opposed to like, what it doesn't mean California is like A++, no work needs to be done.
Correct.
Every single person has access to all these rights, right? Like that is not actually what this means. It is talking around law and policy, and then it can show you within law and policy. So in that way, it is a baseline setter, right? This is around the laws and policies and like, what is the baseline that you need then? You cannot make these things happen without law and policy. Or if you can, ring us up and tell us how, because we don't know.
Yeah,
if
nobody got
100,
right? Like,
yeah, no one gets opposed. Yeah. And like, so what does this tell the folks who are in California versus the folks, say, in Louisiana, which had a very different score? What is it that you hope first of all, who do you hope is seeing this?
Yeah, and I think that's a two-part thing, right? So we do want policymakers in those states to see ones who want to make their state have good sexual and reproductive health and rights access, to see where they are failing compared to other states or where they're succeeding. I think that is really helpful to see, be able to compare, hopefully in a good way, to like make things better. And then I also think it's a really important tool for advocates to use to be like, there are ways that we can be pushing our state to do better in a state like California. Like right now, California has a viability ban. So that's a place that they're losing points. There's like some little things around sex ed as well. So everyone has things that can be done. In Louisiana, I think it is finding groups on the ground who are doing that work, right? We're not an on-the-ground group doing that work, but there are lots of abortion funds and other reproductive justice groups on the ground to connect with, to find ways to push state policymakers to make the changes you need to make sure that you are given the tools to have fulfilled sexual and reproductive health.
When you think about the tools for advocates, I mean, one of the things I know we all hope is that folks who are listening to this podcast take this resource and are able to make changes for the common good in their state, right? And the way that like the change you make in your state can and will have a knock-on effect for better or for worse. Like, and this is like when states make bad moves, other states will follow. When state makes good moves, other states will follow.
Yeah.
And I think can offer some hope in the sense that like our country is really going in the wrong direction overall in terms of human rights and particularly sexual and reproductive rights. But we can see opportunities where like actually government is working for good and trying to protect rights. And here's what it could look like. And here's what it looks like in your state. I do think it's really interesting. Like no state receives a zero. Like there's no zero.
No.
There are two states that receive 15, which is not mucho, right? And that's Florida and Alabama. But even there you can point to, here are things that actually get 15 points. These things, maybe that's somewhere to build on, that like folks can look at that and say like, we seem to have agreement at least on this. How can we build on that? And then also to show like, what does it mean to the people of Florida that like, if they happened to live in another state, they would have more sexual and reproductive rights? And how can that also be a galvanizing tool for a state to understand like, this is about what impacts your people and the way that like, you're actually not measuring up, not just to some theoretic ideal, but to what other states are able to achieve. And you're not better or worse than that other state. There's no reason you couldn't do that, right? That's like, these are like political choices. So I'm really excited about that possibility. I do want to raise to you a very existential question, and thinking about, as you and I always are, is like, okay, now what do we do with this? And how do we make this real and matter? Which is the question of, someone is listening to this podcast and is like, this is such great information. This is so good. Also, it looks incredible. It's very well designed. So it's easy to navigate and the fact sheets are easy to use, which is really key, right? But that oftentimes people in the opposition to human rights often locked down into very ideological positions as opposed to a difference of opinion based on facts. That doesn't mean every single person who doesn't support, sex ed is somehow fully oppositional to facts. And we have seen that increasingly folks that have become entrenched in ideological opposition are not just having a difference of opinion. Like we all kind of want the same thing, which is safety for our children and ourselves and our loved ones. And we disagree about how to get there, right? Instead, what we're seeing is here's facts and people being like, no, they're not, right? So this is a question of like, why do facts still matter what do we do with the fact that facts don't actually help in persuading others in a lot of discourse in the United States? And increasingly, as we've talked about before, that increasingly actually facts do the opposite thing, is that they actually hurt because they cause people to entrench. They don't help them, they cause them to entrench. So if someone hears a fact that disagrees with what they think, they then entrench further into that non-factual opinion that they have, based on not facts, certainly, right? So
I know, right?
And this is a very complicated question. If you could just solve this for America really quickly, that'd be awesome.
Great, Tarah. Thanks for not giving me a really hard question.
But with the report card in mind, this I think is the real question of our time as advocates. Is like, what does it mean to take this report card into a conversation where facts decreasingly matter? Why do we spend our time still talking about facts in our line of work?
Yeah, that's hard. And one, because I do inherently believe that facts matter. And that's like maybe the a little bit of type A, like I can convince people to
the bias.
Yeah.
The bias that facts matter.
Yes.
The left-leaning bias that facts matter.
Correct. But I'm also going to do something else to tap dance for a second of hey, we forgot to answer, and I'm going to blame you. I didn't do one important part in the overview as we were talking. So let's just work it in now.
Oh, yeah.
And then I can maybe marinate on why facts matter and have a better answer.
I think it's also okay, by the way, to say this helps inform us, and then we have different strategies.
Correct.
I don't think there is an answer. It's not a
So we talked about the overview and all the indicators and stuff we looked at, but we didn't do the ta-da! So the ta-da, for the 6th year in a row, the U.S. received a failing grade. We only had 5 states getting an A this year.
Wow.
Which is... that feels like it kind of holds pretty steady, which is sad, but nobody backslid from it. I mean, I don't think anybody backslid from an A too much. But we have 25 states that are failing and 31 states that got a D or lower. So I think it's just really important for people to understand kind of the landscape we're talking about. There were only 16 states that got a B or higher. So we're really failing when it comes to sexual and reproductive health at the state level. I mean, even at the national level, right? And it's really important that we know that it's not stopping here, right? There is clearly this big storm looming on the horizon that is the current administration, that things are probably going to get worse. We've already seen these proposed humongous cuts to Medicaid that would be absolutely devastating. We've also just heard rumors this week of slashing HIV funding in the states. So, there is this storm looming, and it's not going to stop there. We know we are all prepared for more attacks on sexual and reproductive health. So just with all of that in context of where we are right now, and I do think it is really important, even as we do seem to horrifically live in this facts don't matter world, which is wild, that it is important that the people who care about the facts are armed with the facts. So maybe I'm not going to convince people, right? But April in Oregon reads the report card and finds things and talks to him among her friends. And she can convince some of her friends that hey, there are these ways that Oregon can be better. Or some of my friends from back home, maybe they see ooh, look at all these ways Wisconsin is failing. We can push and talks to their friends about it. So I do kind of feel that big picture facts and coming from a big NGO, maybe you're right. I think I might not change people's minds, but people then that I am arming with the facts can help educate the people around them. I mean, that's kind of why I do the podcast, right? Is that I can help give people the tools they need to have conversations with their friends and their community so that they are prepared to, if this comes up in conversation, they can correct people if they are comfortable. They can see someone is mentioning their kids taking sex ed and they can be like, oh, did you know that Wisconsin doesn't mandate sex ed and that your kids are probably getting abstinence only? I think that is really important, is that personal level where you can really, I feel facts can matter more. And I'm sure that's not complete, but
just because the opposition doesn't think facts matter doesn't mean facts don't matter.
Correct.
And I do think one of the questions, right, is will a fact convince someone who is embedded in ideology that is anti-factual?
Correct.
But how are we actually also making sure that we are embedded in fact-based learning and fact-based change, right? So that we don't become, we have ideologies too, which are pro-human rights, right? But so how do we make sure that we're centered and that what we're trying to find as solutions is centered in the facts, and that the way we talk about this, then we might think around narratives and values that we can bring to people. Like we share common values. Like we said earlier, like we all want to keep our kids safe.
Yeah.
That's why I make sure that they know about sex ed, right? That we can talk in values, but we are rooted in facts. Like why does it matter that sex ed isn't fact-based? It matters because rates of unintended pregnancy go up. It matters because rates of cervical cancer go up. It matters because in the long term, it affects people's ability to move between classes, right? So that's the reason we care about that. And therefore, then we make strategies about that because we are based in fact. Yeah, I didn't think you could naturally solve.
And like facts doesn't mean that like you need to know all the things, right? You don't need to know everything. But if a conversation comes up around sex ed and someone's worried about like the information their kids are getting, I know that I could be like, hey, if you want to learn more about what good sex ed looks like, SICAS has some really great resources. Advocates for Youth has really great resources. They have a great video series for young people called Amaze and Amaze Junior. Like, great tools. I don't need to know all those answers, but I know that I can point them to these organizations where they can get the good answers. And so that is a useful tool.
Yeah, we trust those organizations because we know they're based in fact and learning, right? Yeah, no, it was, it's a tough overall question. How do we deal with this moment in time where facts don't matter? But I do think they actually do matter, and they still matter to us. And if how do we make sure then it's shaping our understanding? So we've talked a little bit about what you hope comes from this report. We've talked about why we still base our work in fact, even though we are increasingly seeing, American discourse move away from fact-based discourse or abandon it completely in some cases. We've talked about what it means for states to get really good grades, but still have places to grow. We've talked about what it means for states to have failing grades and still be able to show places we can build from progress. What is it that your audience can do with this information? First, that there is a report card, and then also whatever they find and show in the report card. Like you're waving your magic wand to your amazing podcast listener who's listening right now. And after they get done with this podcast, they do what?
I want them to go to reportcard.reprosfightback.com and play around on the interactive site, right? I think find out how your state is doing, see where the gaps are. And then once you see that and see where your state has, where they can grow and improve, find ways that you can get involved to make that change. If it's calling your local lawmakers and telling them, hey, our state doesn't expand Medicaid, that's bonkers. We need to make sure that everybody who could be covered under Medicaid is covered right now. Or, hey, I believe in comprehensive sex ed. Why doesn't our state have comprehensive sex ed? Why don't we make sure it's medically accurate or teaching about consent or healthy relationships? Like, these are core skills that young people need to learn. And so I think there's a lot of nuggets where you can push your state lawmakers on and showing them that people care, that people want to see these improvements made. Mm-hmm. Tell your friends. If I'm in the group where I have lots of friends with kids, so to make sure that you are advocating for the best sex ed. And like I said, it varies state by state, but even school district by school district. So we don't get it to that level that is too granular for us, but it gives you another place to dig in to one, make sure your state is mandating it, and to make sure that your local school district is teaching it. It's definitely worth keeping an eye on those school board things, right? Sex ed comes up a lot, banning books or talking about trans students or things like that. Those are just really good places to keep an eye on. And just remember that policy, there's national level policy that is impacting access to sexual and reproductive health. There's local, state level, but there's also local. So just finding where you can plug in and get involved. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that I think is really important, and I really want people to take away from this whole report card, is you can care about one or the more of the issues really passionately, but we need to talk about all of them together. We need to make sure that people are having access to all of this, right? If you don't get good sex education early, you have a hard time making healthy decisions later in your life. You can't access care if you can't afford it, if you don't know that service exists. You can't access care if states are putting up restrictions to block you from accessing it. All of these interrelate and intertwine. And it's really important. And it's really important to remember the other thing I always point out is not everybody's going to feel this equally. Unfortunately, those who are already marginalized are going to be the ones who feel all of these restrictions the most cruelly. And so when we are talking about this, we need to make sure that we are speaking up for Black people and Indigenous people, other people of color, those with disabilities, those with low incomes, young people, the LGBTQ plus community, and those with multiple intersections of those identities, because those are the ones who are going to be the most impacted by all of these restrictions.
Yeah, I mean, and this is so related to the conversation we just had on facts, right? Which is one of the reasons we have to see these things together and talk about them together is not to exhaust us or say you have to care about one thing more than you care about it, but because it actually arms us with the way to look for the right solution. Right? Like again, you don't have to be as passionate about X as you are about Y, right? But like we're not going to fight for the right solutions if we are not based, one, in fact, which is what this report card is reporting out, which is the facts. And then two, in understanding the reality and the fact that these things all work together. And so we have to understand that to build our strategies to fight for the things we do care about or care the most about. One of the things I think is most exciting about the report card, and I'm so grateful for your work on it, Jennie, is, folks may have noticed that we are in what I will call bananagrams time, just yes. a really, really existential time for the United States in which our entire national identity seems to be on the edge of a knife. And there's really huge existential questions going on about who we are as people, who we are as a country to ourselves, what type of country we are, what does democracy look like, or will it look like, or will it be? And also like how we're showing up in the world on this global stage, and the assaults that are coming, not just on rights and laws, but on like the very idea of rationality itself are just so overwhelming. And I can't imagine that any single one of the people who's listening to this right now needs that explained to them. Like we are all feeling this like in our physical bodies, and having to like get up in the morning and still somehow operate in capitalism or whatever it is, you have to do every day. And this report card is a reminder that like in a time where I think it is so natural to feel very, very powerless, that actually we have a great deal of power, and we have the ability to understand complex questions and to get to and understand the facts, and like use this website as a way to find out things about your state, what's cooking, what's not cooking, what needs to be addressed, and then to take that information and do so many things about it on so many levels, right? Whatever makes the most sense for you and your community and the things that are important to you, or what's firing off in your state or local community. Like this report card reminds us that we are very, very powerful, actually. And that's one of the reasons that this current government is coming and attacking all of our rights, right? Is because we were powerful. They wouldn't do it if these rights didn't matter. So I do think this is actually a very hopeful thing, even if you're looking at your state report card or District of Columbia, and shout out to the 51st state. Thank you, Jennie, for that inclusion. That if you're looking at your state report card and it is it's a failing grade, that is good. Now you know. Like now you know, and you have that power, and you can think about the ways to talk about these issues and then think about what to do next. And like you are not alone in this. And you're not alone in this, not only because you can see other states that have higher grades have done that work and have had to put in the same exact work that you're going to have to do right now and that you're doing right now, but also you're like not alone in your state, and people are fighting to make that happen. And so you can take this information and now like do something with it, as opposed to like another piece of good or bad news. Like it's not good news to get an A+ in California, and it's not bad news to get an F- in Florida. It is the basis of the reality from which you have to fight. And now you can take that and go and like make the difference where your community needs that difference made, and where you need that difference made in your life. And like you said, Jennie, like there's so many places we can reach out as individuals. across, like doing Google search is going to be real helpful for you in your state, but like every state has an abortion fund. Every state has an LGBTQI rights organization or solidarity organization. Like every state has people working on these issues, and like now's your chance to like join them and fight forward for the things we know matter. So
yeah, and I think the battle cry right now is really your reproductive health, your sexual and reproductive health should not depend on where you live, and it really does right now. But on top of that, it doesn't just depend on where you live. It depends on what resources you have. And that's a real tragedy. Like your ability to access your sexual and reproductive health should not depend on how much money you have or what what you know. Like we need to make sure that everybody has access to full reproductive freedom. They have the ability to make those same choices around their sexual health and have the freedom to access all the care that they need without the state interfering.
Yeah. And with the state enabling, right? The state's obligation is to enable. Yeah. Well, thank you for this report card and this incredible work that helps us do that and helps us in that fight. Thank you for joining me on your podcast, rePROs Fight Back.
Thanks, Tarah.
For more information, can you remind people where they should go to find the report card and to start finding out what's going on in their state and how to get involved?
Yes. So if you go to reportcard.reprosfightback.com. It will take you directly to our microsite where you can learn all of the information.
Amazing. Jennie, thank you so much. Thank you to your incredible community around rePROs Fight Back and all the work. And everybody keep strong and keep the faith.
Okay, y'all. I hope you enjoyed my Tarah's interview with me, not my interview. I had so much fun doing it. Tarah, thank you so much for agreeing to host and ask me all the questions about the report card. As always, I had such a wonderful time talking to you. It was the best. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I will see everybody else next week. If you have any questions, comments, or topics you would like us to cover, always feel free to shoot me an email. You can reach me at Jennie, Jennie, at reprosfightback.com, or you can find us on social media. We're at rePROs Fight Back on Facebook and Twitter, or rePROs FB on Instagram. If you love our podcast and want to make sure more people find it, take the time to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Or if you want to make sure to support the podcast, you can also donate on our website at reprosfightback.com. Thanks all.